Well, it's the big story that we've been tracking over the past 2 days, and finally, in a visit that sent mixed signals to India, Chinese President Xi Jinping will conclude his 3-day trip today. President Xi, after finishing up some key meetings, will depart for Beijing this afternoon. Warmth between the two countries lasted for barely a few hours, after which they got down to business. Fresh incursions by the Chinese army, where more than 1,000 troopers slipped inside the Indian territory, raised tensions in New Delhi, where Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Xi Jinping were meeting for bilateral talks. Now, even as security issues loomed large, China pledged $20 billion in India and promised to provide greater access to Indian companies in key Chinese markets. On the streets of the capital, Tibetans staged protests against the Chinese president's visit. About 40 Tibetans, including women, were detained in the central district. Now, tight security is in place for the Chinese president for today as well. Meanwhile, India and China agreed to cooperate across a wide gamut of activities following Thursday's talks between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Xi Jinping. With the two countries exchanged 16 accord documents for different sectors like railways, trade, administration, culture and industrial parks. Well, this is the final day of President Xi Jinping's visit to India. He will in fact be heading back to Beijing at noon, is what we're given to understand. And while there was a lot of bonhomie that one saw on the banks of the Sabarmati, there were some tough talks that were in fact held between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Xi Jinping yesterday in the backdrop of that incursion that has in fact been reported along the line of actual control. And but obviously the border talks dominating the discourse. And while there were several trade agreements and investment agreements that were in fact signed between the two countries, it was the border talks really that everybody had their eyes and ears pinned on. My colleague Jugal Purohit now joins me live from the national capital. Jugal, it is the final day of the Chinese Premier's visit, and there has been, like we've been saying, a lot of bonhomie between the two leaders, but also some tough talking on the much needed border dispute yesterday.
That's right, Rishika. In fact, it's the Chinese president, not the premier, who's here. But yes, insofar as the agreements are concerned, there has been some progress made. But on the whole, the entire issue seems to be completely clouded with the incursion in Myanmar. Yesterday, we saw the Prime Minister speaking about the fact that he expressed concern about the unending nature of the border dialogue. He also spoke about the Chinese visa policy. Right. He spoke about the Trans-River policy of the Chinese administration. So in that sense, making it absolutely clear that notwithstanding the bonhomie and further talks on trade and economic issues, the dominant factor in the Indian discourse is China's actions along the LAC. So of course that did dominate, and insofar as trade is concerned, there was expectation of perhaps 100 billion worth of trade deals being signed, but what eventually percolated was 20 billion, that's 15 less than the Japanese investment which has been promised. So in that sense, the entire visit turning out to be quite a dampener, with of course some progress in some of the significant specialized areas, but yes, on the whole, falling far short of what was being initially expected. And also, Rishika, if I may add, the Tibetans have been able to, in the last 3 days, register their protest
Jugal,
on
in
every
fact, that is what
location.
Brings me to my next question to you. You've been reporting from the streets of the national capital while this high-profile delegation meet has in fact been on. And yesterday we saw that Tibetan protesters got dangerously close to Hyderabad House, where the talks were in fact being held. Now, on previous occasions when Chinese delegations have in fact visited India, we've seen the Tibetan protesters be perhaps far more contained than they were this time.
That's right, Rishika. In fact, yesterday, if it was Hyderabad House where the president was meeting Prime Minister Modi, then this morning it was barely 200 meters away from where the Chinese president is residing, and he's still there right now. Right. A group of around 15 to 20 Tibetan protesters managed to break in and create and leave behind their protest. So yes, this seems to be largely true, and we've seen them getting much more emboldened and vociferous this time around.
Well, absolutely. Tibetan protesters, they're getting dangerously close to where Xi Jinping is staying for the second day in a row. Thanks, Jugal, for joining us with that update.